Take a deep breath and listen. By the end of this reflection, you may begin to see that the chaos in your life is not a divine punishment, but the very place where your peace is being quietly rebuilt. You have spent so many nights searching your soul, lying awake in the silent, heavy hours of the dark, wondering what you did wrong to deserve this storm. You have replayed every mistake, every misstep, every moment of weakness, trying to calculate the exact spiritual mathematics that led you into this turbulence. You have treated your own heart like a courtroom, putting yourself on trial for crimes of inadequacy and lack of faith. My wounded believer, you have been taught to view every difficulty as a divine correction, a harsh lesson sent from above because you were somehow not enough. You were told that if you just prayed harder, believed stronger, and lived purer, the waters would remain perfectly still. But what if the turbulence around you is not a sign of God's anger, but the breaking apart of everything that was keeping you from true peace? What if the shattering of your neatly organized world is not a penalty for your imperfections, but the clearing of the ground for a grace you could never have manufactured on your own? Chosen one, you have carried the weight of the world on your shoulders, believing that your spiritual resilience was a test of your worth. You have exhausted yourself, trying to prove your faithfulness through endurance, assuming that the harder the struggle, the more God was demanding from you. You have walked through the fire, thinking that the burns were the price of admission to divine favor. You have worn your exhaustion like a badge of honor, secretly believing that God only loves the ones who are bleeding for the cause. But this relentless striving has only left you hollow, drained of the very joy and vitality that faith was supposed to bring. You are tired. You are so deeply, undeniably tired. And in that exhaustion, you have begun to doubt everything. You wonder if God has turned away, if the silence you hear is a judgment on your inadequacy. You wonder if you are simply fundamentally flawed, unable to attain the spiritual heights that others seem to reach with ease. You feel as though you are failing a test you never even asked to take. But I want you to pause and consider the image of God you have been holding on to for so long. For years, you have been presented with a false image of the divine, a distant, intervening monarch who sits on a throne of judgment, orchestrating your suffering to teach you a lesson. You have been told that God is an angry accountant, carefully tallying your mistakes, waiting for the moment you slip up so he can send a storm your way to correct your path. When you see God in this light, every hardship feels like a penalty. Every closed door feels like a rejection. Every moment of pain feels like a consequence of your own spiritual failure. This theology of fear has bound you, wrapped around your heart like tight cords, restricting your breath and making you afraid to simply exist. You have lived in a state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning your horizon for the next lightning bolt of divine retribution. Borg's work points us toward understanding that the traditional view of a distant, intervening monarch who orchestrates our suffering is not the God of Jesus. When you see God as an angry accountant tallying your mistakes, every hardship feels like a penalty. But letting go of that terrifying judge is the first step toward discovering a presence that breathes with you in the dark. We begin to see that God is not the author of our chaos, deliberately sending tragedy to test our resolve. God is not testing your pain. The idea that you must suffer to prove your love to the divine is a human invention, born of our own anxieties and our desperate need to control the uncontrollable. It is a projection of our own harsh self-judgments onto the face of the sacred. The God of Jesus does not stand at a distance, holding a clipboard and grading your performance in the midst of your suffering. It is time to release this false narrative, beloved one. You do not serve a God who demands your suffering as a currency for approval. The chaos in your life is just that chaos. It is the unpredictable, messy reality of being human in a fragile, broken world. It is not a targeted strike against your soul. And when you finally realize that the storm is not a punishment, a profound shift begins to happen within you. The fear begins to drain away. You no longer have to defend yourself against a God who is supposedly out to get you. You no longer have to exhaust yourself trying to figure out what you did wrong to bring this upon yourself. Instead, you can begin to look for the presence that is sitting with you in the ashes, holding your hand as the winds howl. Letting go of that terrifying judge is the first step toward discovering a love that has never once demanded your perfection. It is the beginning of finding your breath again, in a space where you are fully known and wildly, unconditionally loved. You see, the unraveling of your certainty is not a sign of your rebellion. It is the beginning of your liberation. When the rigid structures of your old faith fall away, they leave behind a terrifying emptiness. But that emptiness is not a void. It is a clearing. It is the open space required for a truer, deeper understanding of the sacred to take root. You have been told that doubt is the enemy of faith, that questioning the dogma is a dangerous slide into darkness. But what if your doubt is actually the most honest prayer you have ever prayed? What if your inability to accept the terrifying image of a punishing God is actually the spirit within you, rejecting a lie so that you might finally embrace the truth? Your exhaustion is not a failure. It is the holy surrender that precedes true rest. As you stand in the middle of this chaos, I invite you to lay down your armor. You do not need to fight this battle alone, and you certainly do not need to fight against the very source of your life. The God who is quietly rebuilding your peace is not asking for your heroic endurance. He is asking for your permission to hold you while you fall apart. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be confused. You are allowed to not have all the answers. The pressure to perform, to be the perfect believer with unshakable faith, is a burden you were never meant to carry. Let it slip from your shoulders. Watch it fall to the ground. In its place, feel the gentle, encompassing warmth of a love that requires absolutely nothing from you but your simple, broken presence. You are safe here. You are deeply loved here. And your peace is already, quietly, being restored. Consider the story of the ancient Israelites as they fled from the suffocating grip of empire. In the 13th chapter of Exodus, verses 17 and 18, we are told a profound and beautiful detail about their journey. When Pharaoh finally let the people go, God did not lead them along the main road toward the land of the Philistines, even though it was the shortest and most direct route. Instead, God led them the long way around, through the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Why? Because God knew that if they faced war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. They were not ready for the battle. They were traumatized, exhausted, and barely learning how to breathe as free people. They needed the detour. They needed the long, winding, seemingly chaotic path through the desert, not as a punishment for their lack of faith, but as a profound act of divine protection. My wounded believer, how often have you looked at the detours in your own life and assumed they were a curse? How many times have you felt lost in the wilderness of a delayed promise, believing that your confusion was evidence of God's abandonment? You look at the long way around and you think you have failed. But what if this encompassing spirit does not push you into battles you are too exhausted to fight? Sometimes, the long, confusing detour is simply God shielding your tired soul, giving you space to heal. In Borg's framework of panentheism, God is the encompassing spirit, a reality in whom we live and move, nearer to us than our own heartbeat. This is not a God who sits on a cloud, moving us like pawns on a chessboard, impatient with our slow progress. This is the Spirit who surrounds us, moving with us in the dust of the wilderness, understanding the fragility of our human condition perfectly. As you navigate this wilderness, it is crucial to learn the difference between the voice of this encompassing spirit and the loud, frantic alarms of your own religious trauma. When you are going through a storm, your old spiritual conditioning will scream at you. It will tell you that you are not praying enough, that you are not trusting enough, that the chaos is entirely your fault. It will demand that you fix yourself immediately to regain God's favor. That hypervigilance, that desperate need to control the narrative through spiritual performance, is the echo of your religious wounds. But the voice of the sacred is entirely different. The voice of the encompassing spirit is the gentle whisper that says, "You are safe. Take your time. We can take the long way around." It is the profound, quiet knowing that you do not have to earn your way out of the desert. You only have to let yourself be guided. When we begin to re-see God in this way, we must also begin to re-see the sacred texts that have so often been used against us. For many of us, the Bible was handed to us as a weapon. It was presented as a rigid manual of rewards and punishments, a terrifying ledger of karma where every action has an equal and opposite divine reaction. If you do good, you are blessed. If you suffer, it must mean you have sinned. This literal, transactional reading of Scripture has crushed the spirits of countless beautiful souls, leaving them to search the pages not for comfort, but for the specific rule they must have broken. It turns the living word into a dead instrument of shame. But Borg taught the principle that Scripture is a sacrament. It is a metaphorical window through which the sacred becomes visible to us, not a rigid manual of rewards and punishments. A sacrament is a vehicle of grace, a physical, tangible reality that mediates the presence of the divine. When you look at a window, you do not stare at the glass itself. You look through the glass to see the light streaming in from the outside. In the same way, you do not have to read the sacred texts looking for reasons why you are suffering. You do not have to treat them as a binding legal contract that dictates your doom. Instead, look through them like a window, and you will see generations of broken, ordinary, doubting people who were relentlessly loved right in the middle of their messes. You will see a tapestry of human struggle and divine compassion. You will see that the people of God have always wandered, always questioned, and always been held. This changes everything, child of God. It means that when you read the scriptures, you are not reading a history of perfection, but a history of grace. You are reading the story of a God who meets humanity in the dirt, not a God who demands humanity climb to heaven. And nowhere is this more beautifully and powerfully demonstrated than in the life of Jesus. To understand how God restores our peace, we must look at the Jesus of history, not the stern, condemning figure of religious institutionalism, but the radical healer who walked the dusty roads of Galilee. Borg's reading of Jesus helps us see him as a spirit mystic and healer who dismantled purity systems to bring radical compassion to the marginalized. In the time of Jesus, the religious elite had constructed an elaborate system of purity. You were either clean or unclean, acceptable or outcast, righteous or sinful. And if you were suffering, sick, or poor, it was widely believed that you were unclean, that God was punishing you. But Jesus shattered this entire paradigm. He did not avoid the unclean. He moved toward them. He touched the leper. He ate with the outcast. He did not ask the sick and the exhausted to clean up their lives before he touched them. He met them exactly where their lives felt most unmanageable, offering not a test to pass, but a hand to hold. When you look at Jesus, you see the heart of the encompassing Spirit, perfectly translated into human flesh. You see that God's primary response to human suffering is not judgment, but profound compassion. Jesus did not walk around handing out theological exams. He healed, he restored, he wept. He brought peace to the chaotic, storm-tossed lives of those around him. And he offers that same radical compassion to you, right now, in the exact state you are in. You do not need to reach a state of spiritual purity to access his love. His love is what makes you pure. Think of the prophet Elijah. In the 19th chapter of 1 Kings, we find one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history, not standing on a mountaintop in triumph, but hiding in a cave in absolute despair. He had just won a massive spiritual victory, but instead of feeling victorious, he was terrified, depressed, and completely exhausted. He ran into the wilderness and asked God to take his life. He felt he had failed, that he was no better than his ancestors. He was at the end of his rope, unable to carry the weight of his calling for one more second. And how did the encompassing Spirit respond to this monumental collapse of faith? Did God rebuke Elijah for his lack of courage? Did God punish him for his depression? No, God let him sleep. God sent an angel to bake him bread and give him water. God nourished his physical body and allowed him to rest. And then, When Elijah was ready, God did not speak to him in the violent wind that tore the mountains apart. God did not speak in the terrifying earthquake, nor in the consuming fire. God spoke in the sound of sheer silence, a still, small voice, a gentle whisper. Elijah's story is the story of every wounded believer who has ever burned out, doing what they thought was the work of God. It is the story of the crash that inevitably follows, a life lived on the adrenaline of religious performance. We are taught that burnout is a sign of spiritual failure, a lack of dedication. But Elijah's story tells us something entirely different. It tells us that burnout is simply human. It tells us that even the most deeply connected mystics have moments where the world is simply too much to bear. And in those moments, the divine response is pure, unadulterated tenderness. God did not preach a sermon to Elijah. God provided a meal and a nap. There is a profound theology in a nap, beloved one. There is a profound grace in the permission to simply stop functioning for a while. When you are broken, your body and your spirit need time to knit back together. The encompassing spirit understands this biology of healing perfectly. And when the still, small voice finally speaks, it does not speak to condemn. It asks a gentle question. What are you doing here, Elijah? It invites honest dialogue. It invites the pouring out of grief and frustration. You can tell God exactly how angry you are. You can tell the Spirit how unfair the chaos feels. You can speak your most bitter truths into the silence, and the silence will not strike you down. It will absorb your pain, holding it in the vast, boundless container of divine love. This is the Jesus we see in the Gospels, a Savior who invites the weary and heavy-laden to come and find rest. Not a new set of rules, not a heavier yoke of expectations, but rest for your soul. My friend, when you are in the depths of your own exhaustion, when your faith has collapsed and you are hiding in the cave of your own despair, know this: God is not in the hurricane of your anxiety. God is not in the earthquake of your life falling apart. God is in the stillness that follows. The Spirit does not demand that you get up and perform. The Spirit bakes you bread, gives you water, and tells you to rest. Jesus did not ask the sick and the exhausted to clean up their lives before he touched them. He meets you exactly where your life feels most unmanageable, offering not a test to pass, but a hand to hold. The restoration of your peace will not come through a dramatic display of power. It will come as a quiet whisper in the center of your soul, reminding you that you are allowed to be weak, and that you are held in an embrace that will never let you go. When you internalize this reality, the chaotic events of your life begin to lose their terrifying sting. They do not magically disappear, but they lose their power to define your worth or your standing with the sacred. You realize that the storm is just a storm, and you are secure in the boat with the one who sleeps peacefully in the stern. You do not have to wake him up in a panic, begging him to prove his love by changing the weather. You can simply lie down beside him and let the waves rock you to sleep. This is the profound re-seeing of God, of Scripture, and of Jesus that Marcus Borg invites us into. It is a journey from the exhausting religion of requirements to the restful spirituality of relationship. It is the gentle quiet unhurried rebuilding of a peace that the world and all its chaos can never take away. If God is not orchestrating your chaos to punish you, and if Jesus is the compassionate healer who meets you in the mess, then what does it mean to have faith? For so long you were taught that faith was an intellectual exercise. You were told that faith meant holding on to absolute certainty, believing a specific set of propositions to be factually, historically, and literally true without a shadow of a doubt. In that framework, doubt is the enemy. In that framework, if you question the dogma, you are losing your faith. And when the chaos hit your life, and the neat formulas of your theology stopped working, you felt like your faith was slipping through your fingers. You felt like a failure because you could no longer force your mind to believe the things that no longer made sense. But what if faith is not about certainty at all? Borg once emphasized that faith is not about believing a set of propositions to be true, but about trust-like learning to float on the deep ocean of God's grace. The Latin word for this kind of faith is fiducia. It is a relational trust. It is not about trusting that a certain doctrine is correct. It is about trusting a person. It is about trusting the character of the encompassing spirit. Think about learning to swim in the ocean. When you first step into the deep water, your instinct is to panic. You flail your arms, kick your legs, and exhaust yourself trying to stay above the surface. You believe that your survival depends entirely on your own frantic effort. But true peace in the water only comes when you stop fighting. It comes when you exhale, lay back, and allow the water to hold you. You can stop trying to intellectually figure out why the chaos happened. Faith is simply exhaling, leaning back, and trusting that the water will hold you when you are too tired to swim. You do not have to understand the ocean to float in it. You do not have to have a perfect theological explanation for your suffering in order to be comforted by the divine presence. You, the one learning to trust again, can release the exhausting burden of needing to have all the answers. The need for certainty is a defense mechanism, a way we try to control a frightening world. But fiducia is the surrender of that control. It is the quiet confidence that even in the midst of the unknown, even when the answers are completely obscured by the fog, you are intimately known and deeply loved. Floating does not mean that the waves stop moving. The chaos of life will still rise and fall around you. There will still be moments of grief, days of confusion, and seasons of profound loss. But when you are floating, the waves lift you up and set you down gently, rather than crashing over your head and pulling you under. Your peace is no longer dependent on the stillness of the water. It is rooted in the buoyancy of grace. You can allow yourself to be carried. You can trust that the current of the encompassing spirit is moving you toward healing, even when you cannot see the shore. As we come to the end of this reflection, I want you to hear this truth in the deepest part of your soul. You are not a project that needs to be fixed. You are not a disappointment to the divine. You are not being punished for your past, nor are you being tested to prove your worth for the future. The false image of the angry accountant has been shattered, replaced by the loving embrace of the Spirit who breathes with you. The Scriptures are no longer a weapon of condemnation, but a window into the relentless compassion of God. And Jesus stands before you not as a judge demanding perfection, but as a healer offering rest. You are safe here. You can lay the burden down. You have carried it for far too long, dragging the heavy sack of religious guilt and performance anxiety through the desert of your own exhaustion. It is time to let it go. Belonging is the deepest ache of the human heart, and for so long religion told you that you had to earn your place at the table by being perfect. But when you let go of the need to be perfect, you discover the joy of simply being human. You discover that you have always belonged. You were never an outsider to the sacred. The chaos is ending, not because you finally became perfect, but because you finally realized you are loved. You are a beloved one. You belong to the sacred, not by your own striving, but by the very nature of your existence. There is nothing you can do to make God love you more, and there is nothing you have done that could ever make God love you less. Your broken heart is not a sin. It is the very space where the divine light is entering to restore your peace. You do not have to prove anything anymore. You do not have to defend yourself. You can simply be. Take one more deep breath. Feel the air filling your lungs. That is the Spirit, nearer to you than your own breath, quietly rebuilding your peace. Allow the tension to leave your shoulders. Allow the tight grip you have maintained on your own life to soften. You do not have to hold everything together anymore. The universe is being held together by a love that is vastly stronger than your greatest fears. May you go in peace, trusting that your broken pieces are being gently put back together. May you rest tonight in the profound assurance that you are held, you are cherished, and you are exactly where you are meant to be, in the healing hands of God.